It's hard to tell which sites are safe and which are downright sketchy. But with Cox Panoramic Wi-Fi Advanced Security, it's easy. It protects all your connected devices, helps you avoid sketchy sites, and even sends real-time alerts straight to your inbox or phone. Plus, you can always check in with the Panoramic Wi-Fi app. So the only surprises are that there are no surprises. Learn more at cox.com/pano. Restrictions apply. Copyright 2020 Cox Communications, Inc. All rights reserved. It's hard to tell which sites are safe and which are downright sketchy. But with Cox Panoramic Wi-Fi Advanced Security, it's easy. It protects all your connected devices, helps you avoid sketchy sites, and even sends real-time alerts straight to your inbox or phone. Plus, you can always check in with the Panoramic Wi-Fi app. So the only surprises are that there are no surprises. Learn more at cox.com/pano. Restrictions apply. Copyright 2020 Cox Communications, Inc. All rights reserved.
This is Special Prosecutor Larry Klayman.
I'm the only lawyer ever to obtain a court ruling that a president of the United States committed a crime.
For truth, for competition.
As a young lawyer, I helped break up AT&T. That's why you have all your cell phones today.
For sovereignty, for the Republic.
I'm the guy who, at Judicial Watch, which I founded, uncovered the Chinagate scandal. Millions of dollars going to the Clinton campaign, corrupting our political system.
For the privacy of citizens.
And I'm the only guy to have enjoined the National Security Agency from mass surveillance on hundreds of millions of Americans.
Tearing it up.
I'm the son of meatpackers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I know how to slice and dice.
Bringing it back.
We're going to take this country apart and put it back together again in the way envisioned by our founding fathers.
It's not just talk.
We're not just regurgitating news stories. Larry Klayman, special prosecutor, is making the news.
And now, here's Larry.
Welcome to this week's edition of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. Major news. I don't want to sound like Sean Hannity and say major breaking developments because I don't promise things that don't happen, but things are happening. First of all, let's talk about what's going on in the very politicized leftist federal court in Washington, D.C. The demonstrators, the protesters, overwhelmingly peaceful of January 6th, that were there for President Trump and also entered into the Capitol, are being prosecuted in the hundreds. Already nearly 500 have been arrested. Hundreds have been indicted. The matters are being tried by these hack judges in Washington, D.C., by and large on the federal court, Clinton and Obama appointees. And over the last few weeks in arraignments, in court hearings in these criminal cases, judges such as Amy Berman Jackson, such as Colleen Kohler-Catelli, such as Emmett Sullivan, all that I've locked horns with in the past, made political statements that had nothing to do with the defendants that were in front of them. They kept some of these defendants in prison on the pretext of the big lie. The big lie is Trump saying that the election was fraudulently decided. Well, the big lie is to say it wasn't fraudulently decided and there weren't election irregularities. But these judges are in effect threatening Americans who believe that this was a fraudulent and irregular election. And they're making political statements in the course of the case, claiming that that's their justification to keep some of these criminal defendants in prison because Trump continuously saying that the election was rigged will cause them to be violent when most of them weren't violent in the first place. This is the state of our judiciary. This is why Jefferson predicted that federal judges, unelected, unaccountable to the people, would become despots and tyrants, and that every 20 years or so, we'd have to shed the blood of patriots and tyrants yet again, adding what's a few thousand dead to refresh the tree of liberty. Jefferson did not want to see anybody dead. He didn't want to see anybody hurt, and neither do I. But I dedicated my book, It Takes a Revolution, Forget the Scandal Industry, to Jefferson because he foretold what was going to happen, bringing us to the edge of a violent, bloody revolution, which I'm trying to stave off. And in that regard, not only do we have our citizens' grand juries where we're holding people accountable, whether it's Joe Biden, Hunter Biden, and his brother, James Biden, that's Joe Biden's brother, for a massive bribery racketeering scheme from, you guessed it, Communist China, Ukraine, and Russia. And that leads into what we're going to talk about later on in the show with our fine guests, Israeli counsel, my co-counsel in Israel, and my counsel here, who works with Freedom Watch, John Moseley, and of course yours truly. But this is exactly what we're talking about. It's talking about bringing about justice honestly. And we don't have a legal system that will do that. We have a bunch of political hacks and court jesters on the bench, and it's extremely dangerous because without judges who will protect the American people, and in this case, it's not even protecting, it's threatening them if they disagree, then the situation becomes such that you're in a revolutionary state. Now, we're going to talk about other things as well during this show, which are very, very important. And what's been coming out lately is the truth. Freedom Watch, Larry Klayman, our Israeli counsel, John Moseley, experts, Judy Mikovits and Francis Boyle, have all been saying, and we've testified to that effect, not just in our citizens' grand juries where we're seeking the indictment of Fauci and Communist China this week. In fact, you can see it, those citizens' grand juries at freedomwatchusa.org. We conduct them on Thursday. This will be aired after Thursday, so go to freedomwatchusa.org and watch. But all of a sudden, because the Republicans need an issue, the Republican Party is dead, it's over. They stabbed President Trump in the back. They have little to no support. They've accomplished nothing in decades. They're bankrupt. All they do is raise money on Fox News by and large. They had to come up with something. Well, it's good that they finally came up with something, but they have no solution. And now it is quite clear that Communist China has been hiding what went on at the Wuhan lab. Our experts have testified that it's a bioweapon, that the seeds of COVID-19 were given to the Communist Chinese by, you guessed it, Fauci and Obama and Biden. Hear that? Biden, who sent $3.7 million over to the Communist Chinese lab to do research on a derivative of the SARS virus, which is even more lethal than COVID-19. And it obviously escaped either by design or accidentally, frankly, probably by design, because the Chinese know what they're doing. They wanted to destroy the Western world, and they have virtually done that. Now, over a year ago, your Freedom Watch and our Israeli colleagues took action. We filed cases before the federal court in Dallas, Texas, class actions where a company was put out of business, and they're a plaintiff. And we also, I think that's probably the Communist Chinese calling. They're not very happy. And a case was filed in Jerusalem, Israel. And those cases have been languishing in the courts, not just the federal judge. Again, a magistrate judge, not even a judge, has put us through various hoops in trying to get the Chinese served. We served them twice through DHL and Federal Express, which is a legitimate way to do it. We had the clerk of the court Senate. The Chinese thumbed their nose at the legal system and refused it. So we then went to the State Department. Under Biden and Harris, the State Department's dragged its feet, so we're pushing them to get service so this case can get on the road. And our Israeli colleagues will tell you what's been going on in Israel, where, if you can believe this, the Israeli government, in effect, intervenes for the Communist Chinese questioning jurisdiction in that court. It's typical. Governments protect other governments. Judges are probably afraid for their lives. And this is exactly what Jefferson was saying. Without a legal system that will stand in the stead and protect the American people or the Israeli people, you're in a revolutionary state. And in that regard, we have our Third Continental Congress in Philadelphia on July 5th and 6th. John Moseley's invited. Our Israeli colleagues are invited. Everybody's invited. Go to freedomwatchusa.org, where we will discuss forming a new government, and we will form a new government on the 245th anniversary of the first time we declared independence on July 4th, 1776. As I've said, the situation is much worse today than it was in 1776. King George III and the British monarchy were not socialists. They were not communists. They were not radical Muslims. They were not radical Marxians of the Jewish left, and you know I'm Jewish, so you can't call me anti-Semitic, but it's true. They were not radical feminists. They were not radical LGBTQTs, and they were not radical blacks and radical atheists. In fact, King George III was Mother Teresa compared to the people that are now in control of this country, total leftist control. And in that regard, and this is what I want to discuss with my colleagues for the rest of the show, is that Joe Biden, when he came into office, predictably killed an investigation of the Chinese virus of COVID-19 escaping from the lab. Now, he's been forced now to reinstitute it, but who's going to be handling that investigation? The same political hacks that usually cover everything up. And then ask yourself this question: how is it that Freedom Watch and our Israeli colleagues, and we're a plaintiff in that case as well in Jerusalem, Israel, why did we have to take action for the damage? Why didn't our governments do it? And all you hear the Republicans do is get on TV, on Fox News with Hannity or whoever, saying, oh, we need an investigation. Well, where have they been for a year and a half as the American people and the Israeli people and the rest of the world have been severely harmed, not just health-wise, economically, but also emotionally? Where have these governments been? And this is why, in this country, I don't speak for my Israeli colleagues, we need a new government by and for the people. Because in the beginning of the Declaration of Independence, it says, when the rulers no longer represent the government, people have a right under the laws of nature and nature's God. Hear that? Nature and nature's God. Not man-made law. That's unnecessary, because the edicts of King George III and the edicts of Biden and Harris are of no force and effect. They're dictatorial. They have a right, the people, to alter or abolish the government and to form a new government by and for the people with equal rights for everyone in pursuit of life, liberty, and happiness. That's a paraphrase of what Jefferson and the others wrote. So with that being said, this is where we are, is that we, the American people, we, the Israeli people, we must rise up. We must take action ourselves. We cannot depend on governments. Our governments have failed us. And I turn our attention now to my Israeli colleagues, to say hello and tell people that hopefully you're not in hiding over there. You've been severely damaged with the vaccines that they've been pushing on the Israeli people, as we have here. But we have a few minutes. We have 1 minute left in this show. Just give an introduction, guys. And then, John, you give an introduction, too. You have 1 minute.
Hi, everybody. This is Ruth and Ariesta Kowalski. We filed this lawsuit in Israel with our partner, Yaakov Badur office. One picture that really set in my mind when we did the investigation before we filed it.
We're going to get into the subject matter quickly. Let me just have John do an introduction, and then we get to a long segment, and we'll get into that.
John Moseley, an attorney, have helped a lot on the research and interviewing some of these witnesses for Freedom Watch's lawsuits and complaint. And we're happy to talk about the long history here that we've been working on this.
Okay, well, we're going to be right back with our esteemed colleagues, very brave people who are not afraid, and you're not afraid either. Be right back.
Fearless.
Disclaimer, he's crazy, he's racist, he's out to kill the Democrats.
Dangerous.
Don't care, he uses the court and the law.
Lethal.
This is bad.
Special prosecutor
Very bad.
Larry Klayman.
If you'd like to support Freedom Watch and this radio show, go to freedomwatchusa.org.
We're back with Ruth and Ari, my esteemed colleagues, my friends, my brothers and sisters in pursuit of freedom and liberty in Israel and in the United States and around the world. Ruth, tell us about the case in Jerusalem, Israel, that we filed, where Freedom Watch is among the plaintiffs, and where I'm also appearing as a party, because it's very, very important what's going on in Israel.
Hi, Larry and everybody. We really hope to see you in the hearing in Israel. Yes, we filed it in Jerusalem court. Right now, the situation is that the government claims for immunity on behalf of the Chinese. And again, like what you mentioned, is the part of our government is to protect their own citizens, if it's the Israeli or the Americans. And obviously, this is not what's happening right now. The government and the courts protect the Chinese, and they see in their interest, the interest of the Chinese. They don't care about how much we suffered here. All they care is the immunity. And unfortunately for them, I believe we will win this case, because the moment we can prove that this is bioweapon, the issue of immunity is not relevant anymore. The issue of immunity is relevant only when it's a regular class action. But the exception is when it's a bioweapon and it's a war. There is no immunity for these cases. And we really hope that eventually the courts will say that there is no immunity as a result of this being a bioweapon. And like I started saying before, what strikes me is when I did the research before we filed the lawsuit, is a picture in the Wuhan lab of Fauci, of Bill Gates, and Obama in the lab in Wuhan. And I really wonder what these guys were doing there when we know that the research was going on in this lab for bioweapon and this type of COVID and SARS. So this is one point that I wanted to mention. Arik, you want to say something?
I want to say that Anthony Fauci, through various U.S. authorities, funds the gain of function research that is manipulated viruses like corona. It was prohibited in the USA, and as we know, Anthony Fauci funds this in the Wuhan lab. So they manipulated coronaviruses there, and it's leaked out throughout of the world.
And I want to say that according to the ethics rule in the United States, you're not allowed to participate in this kind of research. And this is the reason why at certain stage they transfer the research to China, which has a different codes of ethics. And this is real manipulation, and like my colleague said, Fauci was, or even Obama administration was financing this illegal research, which is illegal in the USA. And they found a solution. They transferred this research to China, to the Wuhan laboratory, which from there the virus escaped.
Well, it's a very good point, and it's why we are seeking the indictment of Anthony Fauci, if for nothing else than negligent homicide, as over 600,000 people have died now in the United States and hundreds of thousands around the world. Fauci is a criminal. He needs to be held accountable. And of course, we know that he was working in Fort Detrick, Maryland, where the United States also produces bioweapons, even though it's illegal under international law. It was the anthrax after 9/11 that leaked from that lab at Fort Detrick, Maryland. If you think your government represents you, you live on another planet. They have their own agenda. We're going to be right back with the next segment of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. We have some more time, and we're going to develop these issues. Stay tuned, listen carefully, and John Moseley's up next.
And now, 4 words that make corrupt politicians make wee-wee in their little pants.
Transparency and the rule of law will be the touchstones of this presidency.
But we have to pass the bill so that you can find out what is in it.
Special Prosecutor Larry Klayman.
Be the one who makes our country great again. Go to freedomwatchusa.org and donate.
We're back with John Moseley, Ruth and Ari, my Israeli colleagues, esteemed Israeli colleagues. John's esteemed as well. I've worked with John a long time. He worked with me at Judicial Watch, and now he works with Freedom Watch as a contract attorney when we need him. He's a very fine attorney. John prepared the affidavits of Judy Mikovits and of Francis Boyle, which under oath attest to COVID-19 being a bioweapon. Tell us about that, John. And you're going to see those affidavits, by the way, at our citizens' grand juries. We're presenting it to the citizens' grand jury.
Well, it's interesting that everything that is now breaking out and getting in the U.S. Senate, Freedom Watch and our Israeli colleagues were on it a year ago at least. So, I mean, pretty much to summarize everything, it's like everything you're hearing we have been working on, and it was, well, I don't know if it was ignored or it just takes that long for it to percolate through the system. But remember, Freedom Watch filed a complaint with the International Criminal Court and prepared these affidavits. I had the honor of with Larry of interviewing Dr. Judy Mikovits and at great length and talking to her a lot about a lot of things. And so we learned about all these things. And the first time I heard of gain of function was from Dr. Judy Mikovits, who worked at the National Institute for Health, the National Cancer Institute, Fort Detrick. Tremendous experience, and she is the author of several books. And the video Plandemic was about her book, and then she was, of course, immediately ostracized as a kook because she said things that people didn't want to hear. But the gain of function that we learned about from Dr. Mikovits is part of the key here, because people said, "Oh, it wasn't this was not created in a laboratory," but because it looks natural. But the gain of function means taking a natural virus and enhancing it. So it's not going to look like some alien robot thing from another galaxy. It's going to look like a natural virus that has been increased. And Dr. Judy Mikovits explains in here how it looks like 100 years of evolution in a decade from SARS. I was reminded from her that the virus is SARS-CoV-2. The previous SARS round was SARS-CoV-1. That's the virus. The disease that results is called COVID. And she said it's like the virus has evolved 100 years, and at least in just the 10 years since SARS-CoV-1. So it was very interesting. We provided these affidavits to the International Criminal Court, filed it with the lawsuit in Texas, and pretty much everything you're hearing, we're still way ahead of them in terms of the details that Freedom Watch's lawsuits provided. Haven't heard of anything that I know of from the International Criminal Court. They acknowledge they're going to look at it, but they could have been on this all along. And of course, we're asking Freedom Watch is asking that China compensate the tremendous cost of this, whether it was intentional or not. That this behavior has caused just tremendous devastation around the world, so this is something that we're looking for action on, and the other thing too that came out is as Dr. Mikovits puts in her affidavit and our legal filings, is you heard about all this thing that COVID-19, the virus, came from a bat. They never found a bat. And then they say, well, it's a bat or maybe something else, which means they have no idea. Maybe it was a bat, maybe it was some other animal. So basically, you don't know. There's no actual evidence of any bat or anything else that transmitted this virus, which has been interesting. Now, most of official Washington is, I think, pretending that they're changing their tune because of the reports that 3 lab workers in the Wuhan Institute of Virology were hospitalized in November with a mysterious illness. And this has given them the reason that why they're now re-examining the lab origin theory from the Wuhan Institute of Virology, which is, I think, within 20 miles of this wet market. But we pointed that out a year ago, that the people who were infected first did not have a connection to this seafood market, and that the initial, I don't know if we have patient zero, but getting down there to the first patients were associated closer to the lab than they were to the seafood market. So this big revelation is something that Freedom Watch has been on a year or more ago. I think we filed, didn't we, Larry, with the International Criminal Court in May, and then filed the lawsuit, I think, in June.
That's right.
Up on a year ago.
You know, the bottom line is everyone is either afraid or frankly bribed with regard to China. Biden, who's been indicted for this, you know, John, you helped prepare the indictments for our citizens' grand juries. I mean, he took millions and millions of dollars laundered through Hunter Biden from the communist Chinese. So obviously he kills an investigation that Trump claims to have started. I'm not so sure of that, frankly, either. When he comes into office, he's paying back China for the millions of dollars that have been laundered into his accounts, as testified to by Tony Bobolinsky, who said that Joe Biden was getting a 10% cut of what the Biden family was laundering, hundreds of millions of dollars. And then there's the fear factor. But here's the big question. We have a national security agency. Freedom Watch enjoined that national security agency preliminarily twice for unconstitutional surveillance on the American people, and yours truly and my clients. We know that the NSA grabs every piece of communication, whether it's a telephone call, a text message, a email, or whatever, worldwide. The American government knew, it had to know, that this was a bioweapon from the start. We've obviously got communications inside of China. We have Chinese interpreters. We have a lot of very capable and intelligent Chinese Americans that can translate, that work presumably for the NSA and the CIA. We knew. And that helps explain why President Trump, all he ever did, as much as I love President Trump, and must I thank him for what he did, he knew because he had to have known. And that's why all he ever did was to call the communist Chinese names, that it was the Kung Flu or whatever. He did nothing either, frankly, because you know what? The United States sowed the seeds of its own destruction by having Anthony Fauci, with rubber-stamped approval by Biden and Obama, the Obama-Biden administration, giving the Chinese almost $4 million to do research. We brought it upon ourselves. So the criminals lie not just in China, but they also lie here. And Fauci is the number one criminal, and he will be indicted. And he was indicted last Thursday, and there'll be more coming, believe me, because this is an outrage. The Republicans are resurrecting it now because they need an issue, because the party's dead. It has nothing to offer. So all of a sudden, Rand Paul comes forward. He is a doctor. He went to my alma mater, Duke Medical School, and he's accusing Fauci of wrongdoing and everything else. But where has Rand Paul been and the rest of them for a year and a half? Ruth and Ari, same thing in Israel? Same thing happening there?
Unfortunately, it's similar. The court in Israel is procrastinating. There is no decision. All they concern about is immunity, which now hopefully will not be an issue anymore after we can prove that it's a bioweapon. And they're waiting for a decision from the United States court. So they relying on, the decision of the judge in Florida to know what he's going to decide, and they're interested to know, and then they will make a decision. So it's being procrastinated. There's no decisions, and not taking major decision against the Chinese.
Yes, and still the Attorney General of Israel must give his opinion on our request to make a hearing about the immunity issue, and it will be his. He will give his opinion about 30 days. and then we shall proceed from.
I love Israel. I'm a Zionist, obviously. Land was given to the Jewish people and by extension to Christians. Okay, that's the home not just of King David, Moses, and Jesus, but of all of us. But Israel has not been bold enough. People always think that Prime Minister Netanyahu is a very strong leader. I personally, I don't speak for you, Ari and Ruth, think that he's very weak. And the latest example of weakness is having bowed down to so-called President Joe Biden and not finishing off Hamas. He left the cancer in place for the third time in several years. I was actually in Israel the first two times there was the war with Hamas. I was actually there as rockets were coming in, and I know what it's about, and it's a lot worse this time. Over 4,000 rockets hit Israel, and he bows down to Biden and Harris and leaves the cancer in place with Hamas, which is going to grow back. I want to get your thoughts on that, because I don't see him as a strong leader, and the people in and around him, and they're not seen to be strong leaders to me either.
Well, you can include us within your opinion about Bibi Netanyahu. We don't speak on behalf of the Zionists, we speak on behalf of the people of Israel. And what Bibi Netanyahu sold the major assets of Israel to the Chinese. He sold the port of Haifa, the port of Ashdod. He sold 1 million dunam of land in the south to the Chinese people. He sold our power station for producing electricity to the Chinese. He sold to the Chinese all the companies that produce food. He sold 360 companies of high-tech to the Chinese. Basically, the major assets of Israel were sold to the Chinese. So obviously, he's not taking care of Israel's interests, and he's not a strong person as we thought he is. And I totally agree with what you said about Bibi Netanyahu, unfortunately.
I wonder, like Biden, what he's gotten under the table, frankly, from the Chinese. And that helps explain why the Israeli government, the Ministry of Justice, is coming in and arguing that your case and our case should not be in an Israeli court. I mean, China is very smart. Communist Chinese are smart. They have bought up all these public utilities. They also control the Panama Canal. They own utilities throughout the world. They can shut the West off whenever they want. They've checkmated it. And this helps explain why our governments just talk and why there's no action. And let me get back to Rand Paul, because Rand Paul, after I filed the case against the National Security Agency many years ago, John helped in that too, he comes out and he files a class action after me. And then he says he's the first that filed it. Well, he didn't file anything first, and then he never even prosecuted. He just used it to go in a soapbox to raise money for himself and to run for the presidency. You know, and this is what it's about. And to the extent that the Republicans claim allegiance to Trump, it's only because they want his supporters. They stabbed him in the back as they stabbed the American people in the back. The party's dead. It's over. It's finished. And in a separate organization, I'm starting a new party, which we'll introduce at the Third Continental Congress, called the New American Independence Party. We need competition here. I'm tired of listening to Republicans. And I was a Republican. I'm still technically registered. I just haven't had time to quit, but I will. This is where we are right now. You've got an evil and corrupt Democrat Party, and you've got a simply corrupt Republican Party. The American people are not being represented. The Israeli people are not being fully represented. And the Western world is hanging by a thread. We'll be right back with the verdict section of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. We're going to wrap this up with my very esteemed colleagues. This is a very important show. I want you to share it with everyone. And also read my book, It Takes a Revolution to Forget the Scandal Industry, because this is where we are today. I advocate peaceful and legal means to save this country and other countries similarly situated. Be right back.
Before he was a trial lawyer, he sliced him and diced him.
People used to ask me, Larry, what caused you to start Judicial Watch and now Freedom Watch, given the powerful forces in this country that put you at risk?
In a meat packing plant.
I'm the son of meat packers in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I know how to slice and dice.
A very special prosecutor, Larry Klayman.
We're back with the verdict, fellow patriots, ladies and gentlemen, people who just don't sit on the couch watching Sean Hannity of Fox News or whatever there is in Israel. Now is not the time for entertainment. Now is not the time, as Thomas Paine said, in the days leading up to our first revolution and July 4th, 1776, it's not the time for summer soldiers and sunshine patriots. It's time for people to rise up if they want to have a country. It's time for people to not just pledge their fortunes and risk those fortunes and their lives. It's time to actually do something, as our founding fathers did in the days leading up to 1776 and thereafter. And again, what was the situation in 1776? The colonies were extremely wealthy. Most of the people there wanted to remain with the British crown. They were fat and happy. But the king decided that he needed to pay for the rest of his colonies on the backs of the American citizens, the people that then were occupying the New World. And then when we objected and we tried to reason with him, he took the legal system, the criminal justice system, back to the court of St. James in London, England, took it away from us because we were challenging his criminally minded edicts, forcing things down the throat of the American people. And then when hostilities finally broke out, because the Revolutionary War started before July 4th, 1776, in Lexington and Concord, and later New York City, he went to seize our guns, our rights of self-defense. That's where the Second Amendment comes from. That's where the right to have militias to defend oneself against the government come. They're both in the Second Amendment. But then, look at the situation at that period of time in American history and compare it to today's situation in American history, where we have radical leftists in control of this country, total control, an evil Democrat Party which is pushing it, and a corrupt Republican Party which is no opposition at all. All they do is go on Hannity or Fox News and raise money for themselves and shoot their mouth off. This is where we are. And it's why I wrote my book, It Takes a Revolution. There's no political messiah. And if President Trump was ever a political messiah, he will no longer be, because the Democrats and the Republicans are putting up no resistance, as usual, are about ready to indict him criminally. The district attorney in New York City, Cyrus Vance, the attorney general, Letitia, whatever, I forget her name, they're going to indict him criminally for tax evasion and tax fraud at a minimum. And he's going to be so tied down for the next several years, you can forget about him rising again. But he's not the Messiah. No one's the Messiah. The American people are the Messiah. And the American people will rise up with God's grace, as we did in 1776. We invoked the divine providence. And God has always protected Israel. You know, in 6,000 years, the Arabs haven't won one war, okay? That's more than the law of averages. That land is our land. And the United States is our land, and our histories are tied. And the Judeo-Christian ethic is the same. And therefore, we the people must rise up. I'll give the final word to Ari and Ruth about Israel and about John. We have about a minute and a half left, but give me your final thoughts here. I want people to go to freedomwatchusa.org. I want you to come to our Third Continental Congress in Philadelphia on July 5th and 6th, and I want you to support our grand juries, because we the people need to do the job ourselves. We have 1 minute left, 30 seconds for our esteemed Israeli colleagues. Conclude it out, John, with your thoughts.
Yes, I want to say whatever going to be the decision in Israel, it will affect the rest of the world, because the justice system and taking responsibility for all the crimes that happen in this lab is major, and whatever will happen in Israel will, like I said, affect the United States and the rest of the world.
Let's give John 30 seconds, because you're two of the most courageous people around. Very few people have the courage these days. you both have it. John, final word.
Yeah, so Larry, I think, is telling us we got to get out of a spectator mentality and start, realizing, oh, it's me. I'm the one who has to hit the ball. And I'm looking forward to seeing everybody in Philadelphia around July 3rd and 4th. And we've got to, I do believe it's our last shot, which like our first revolution.
Thank you, John. God bless everybody. God save everybody. Remember, God will help those that help themselves. Otherwise, our nations are lost. I'll be back next week with another edition of Special Prosecutor with Larry Klayman. Until then, thank you for listening to us.
The Memorial Day sale is happening now, so get in the spirit of summer with holiday savings from JCPenney. Shop doorbuster deals this Friday to Monday only. Save up to 60% on select swim styles for men, and get select St. John's Bay and A&A tees for $5.99, and microfiber twin sheet sets for just $9.99. Plus, save an extra 25% with coupon. Celebrate every summer moment with JCPenney. Offers valid 5/28 through 5/31. Coupon offer valid through 5/31. Some exclusions apply. See store or jcp.com for details.
It's hard to tell which sites are safe and which are downright sketchy. But with Cox Panoramic Wi-Fi Advanced Security, it's easy. It protects all your connected devices, helps you avoid sketchy sites, and even sends real-time alerts straight to your inbox or phone. Plus, you can always check in with the Panoramic Wi-Fi app. So the only surprises are that there are no surprises. Learn more at cox.com/pano. Restrictions apply. Copyright 2020 Cox Communications, Inc. All rights reserved.
Hi, Little Bob here to let you know that my Bioweapon mattresses offer the comfort and quality of a national mattress brand for half the price. No matter your budget, there's a Bioweapon Memory Foam Hybrid or Hybrid Plus mattress for you. But don't take it from me. Check them out at mybobs.com. 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 mybobs.com.